In our unit, we are going to examine the Middle Ages. This is a period roughly 1,000 years ago. So how can we do it? How can we examine this period of time 1,000 years ago? How do we know what happened 1,000 years ago? How do we know about events? How do we know how society was structured? How do we know how people lived? Well, as historians, we rely on evidence. And we have written evidence, things such as histories. These are records of events that occurred at the time, or as they recorded later periods up to the modern time. We also have letters. In this case, we have a love letter from a king of England to his mistress. And inscriptions. In this case, it is a celebration of the conquest of England in 1066, obviously by the conquerors. But we also have physical evidence. Things such as remains of buildings, in this case a Crusader castle from the 13th century. We have artifacts, objects that have survived to the modern age that we can investigate and give us a clue as to how people lived. And we have human remains. This can tell us an enormous amount of information about how people lived and their lives. In this case, this is a plague pit, a mass grave from the time of the Black Death in Italy. Now, our sources can be divided into primary and secondary sources. A primary source is information coming from the time of the event. For example, a list of property held in a village in 1086 is a primary source. It was written in 1086, so we know what property people had in the villages at that time. Secondary source is information removed from the event by time or space. For example, a history of the Middle Ages written in 2008 is a secondary source. It gives us information, but it is given to us from an author. Now, the author may have drawn on primary sources, but the history book itself is a secondary source. So, as we go through our course, have a think. What do you think are the advantages of using primary sources? And what do you think are the advantages of using secondary sources?